As I found out while playing, being into cars and video games doesn't necessarily make me the target audience for a video game about cars. Project Cars, in fact, during my first 2 hours, had me convinced I would be sticking to Mario Kart for all my racing needs until the end of my days. As context is so important, up until this week I had played a decent amount of exactly 3 racing games: Need for Speed Underground 2, the Japanese-only Initial D Special Stage, and of course, many hours of LEGO Racers as a kid. And so I can only really judge Project Cars on my experience, and the game aspects that are easily quantifiable without familiarity of the sim racing genre. Right off the bat, the game starts off with a slick intro video, but then drops you into the main menu where an announcer of questionable quality
"You're about to embark on the ultimate driver journey,"
proceeds to explain every menu option, often going into multiple paragraphs of voiceover, despite it being pretty self-explanatory and well detailed in text anyway, all accompanied by the out-of-place wailing of opera music. It's nowhere near as dire as Dirt 3 was with its personalities narrating your every click.
I'm Ellie, your business agent.
Check out multiplayer for some totally awesome racing.
But first impressions are important racing games, goddamn. Luckily, unlike Dirt, the narration is skippable this time, and is nowhere near as offensive to begin with.
Totally awesome racing.
Jumping into quick play, I was pleasantly surprised to find that the game includes quite a few lesser known UK circuits that I'm familiar with in real life, like Alton Park and Liddon Hill, so I grabbed a Ford Escort and headed for the rallycross layout of Liddon. That was a mistake. For the first hour or so of playing, the driving was no fun to me. Spinning out on everything but the straightest lines, and even then sometimes, it felt like I was fighting the game every second to keep my car facing the right direction. Drawn by the noise of engines, some of my family appeared and alternated between wanting a turn playing and offering advice based on how to tackle the track for real, none of which seemed to help too much given the instability of the car. After a while of assuming this was just the difficulty level of going into a sim racer from the super casual racing games I had playtime with, I realised that something had to be wrong here and went to experiment with the settings. Halving the throttle and steering sensitivity made an instant difference. It became possible to complete laps without touching grass and gave me the, in hindsight, false confidence to give career mode a try. Career mode has you pick your motorsport from a generous amount of all but the highest tier sports unlocked from the start. Each race in the championship also consists of a practice and qualifying run, and depending what championship you chose, practice laps take either an hour or 30 minutes. You can tailor the length of the actual race in detail, but unfortunately, for qualifying and practice your only options are on or off, meaning you have to choose between going into a track you've never raced before blind, practically guaranteeing a loss, or spending up to an hour and a half of your time on a single race. This lack of choice makes no design sense at all, especially considering every other aspect of the game is bursting with tuning options, and after a single race I was pretty much done, finding that although I could manage outside the pack in practice, during the main event, with avoiding other racers a concern, the car still seemed to lose traction so easily that the whole race was a constant battle of small corrections to keep it from sliding out of my control at the slightest provocation, and that was on a track with perfect weather and surface conditions. Giving up on career mode, and Janettas in general, I went back to quick play to experiment properly. Track variety is deceptively impressive. Although the game doesn't properly differentiate circuit types in the menu, in fact the only way to sort them is alphabetically, there are actually a good assortment of loose surface tracks between the rallycross circuits I mentioned earlier and some specific ice and snow specialty tracks. Unfortunately, if like me you're a much bigger fan of street than track racing, you might find the selection a bit more disappointing. Of the 62 tracks in game, only around 6 are street tracks. Luckily, these are some of the best and most gorgeous tracks the game has to offer. Asia Circuit and Long Beach are packed city courses that have been all crash barriered up a bit too much in my opinion, both just playing like tighter versions of the standard circuits. But both the Belgian and beautiful Scottish street circuits are countryside tracks with huge sweeping corners and amazing scenery. And the Asia Coast and California highway roads, the only 2 point-to-point tracks in the game, are true hill climb and descent courses, with sequences of tight hairpin turns by cliff edge. I wish there were more point-to-point maps because they really are great to drive, and 2 doesn't really do it for me, but I understand the game's desire to focus on track circuits, and they can at least both be run in smaller portions or reversed, to give a bit of variety when combined with changing the weather conditions. The weather system is one place Project Cars 2 stood out for me, offering a huge selection of 17 conditions for every circuit, as well as one of my all-time favourite novelty options in real-time weather, which pulls actual current weather conditions from that track's real-world location for you to race in. Car selection is impressively comprehensive inside the major disciplines, offering both modern and classic cars that represent their sport. My personal standouts being the Lotus F1 car that is identical to a Scalextrics I had as a kid, and, of course, my namesake the Cozzy. The selection sort of tapers off once you leave professional motorsports though, especially when you get to the more interesting types of vehicle Slightly Mad has included, seemingly to check boxes. There is a drift car, a kart, a pickup, a bizarre selection of road cars that are almost entirely supercars but include a Renault Megane over some more noteworthy picks. Not a single Subaru to drive, for example, despite the Impreza's pedigree. The more iconic Ferraris are conspicuously missing too, presumably cut to make the leaked Ferrari DLC more tempting, and there are very few cars to be found that are capable of dealing with the game's snow tracks. No bowlers here, even the pickup truck is rear-wheel drive only. The game also offers a huge amount of liveries for each vehicle, as well as a slot for a custom one. Disappointingly though, unless you use that custom slot, your paint job is limited to the pre-selected options. I'm not asking for Need for Speed Underground level of customisation here, but picking a colour outside factory standards basically requires you to learn how to do texture work. Using an outside program you edit a Photoshop document, following an unofficial guide on the forums for the first Project Cars, and then import it back into the game. Also, while I'm doing nitpicks, camera controls are inverted by default when playing in third person and normal in first. Although you can switch these around, there's no way to fully turn off camera inversion, or turn it on for that matter, in both modes. Anyway, eventually I found a car that agreed with me, and luckily that was the 2016 Ford GT, possibly the best looking car in the game. After many tweaks of the controls, further lowering sensitivity, settling on a third person view, first person looks great and I'm sure it's amazing in VR, but as a beginner I need all the track awareness I can get, and looking into driving assists, I began to get a feel for how I should be playing. I ultimately decided on the least intrusive assist, the driving line and braking indicator, rather than the auto braking or steering options, because I felt like the first would show me how to play less badly, rather than compensate for me playing badly. And for the most part it worked. Dropping speed until the chevrons turn green is a reliable way to spend less time bouncing off the side rails, and taught me the right time to brake going into bends. Unfortunately, this indicator isn't always trustworthy. Oftentimes not showing at all or appearing only as a single chevron well past the apex of the corner, far too late to be of any help, yet stretching on for miles on perfectly straight roads. I think this is due to the way the indicator layers with the ground, as it's particularly bad on bumpy roads, your help line seeming to disappear under the track. While it's undeniably frustrating when your own HUD betrays you into slamming into a wall on a track you haven't played before, this inability to trust the guides led to me memorising more of the tracks I was familiar with, and with the fixed controls, going into my third hour of the game I was beginning to get the hang of it all. I still got a fair few contact warnings, but no more spinning out, and I was confident every mistake was mine, reluctant as I am to remove the pedal from the floor, rather than something out of my control, which is when the game suddenly started to become fun. Going back and retrying my first setup of Ford Escort at Lyddon, I realised I was now winning races against some of the easier AI, but more importantly I was making it round the track on the right bit of road, instead of power sliding across the track every time on that final corner. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't playing well, I still don't, but making it further down the hill each time before losing the pack on those point-to-point tracks, and racing through the changing weather conditions and making a last-minute comeback to first on Bannock Relay are all moments I enjoyed the hell out of. I don't know if I'm going to continue playing Project Cars after a week or two. I think career mode is certainly out of the equation. I just don't have that much free time to commit to an hour plus per race. But I can see myself coming back to the custom race, quick play mode, well off into the future. The only things putting me off from fully recommending the game are the lack of local multiplayer and the fact that leaderboard times aren't saved in quick play. To race against even your own ghosts and personal bests, you have to go into a separate online time trial mode, which has far less customization options to it. Being able to pop back in months later and quickly play my favourite race against my past self's time has been a draw of these games since the GameCube era, and that's missing from Project Cars 2. My advice to other complete racing game novices wanting to jump in here is to definitely try before you buy if you can. But if you're willing to invest the time to get the controls set up how you want them, working for you instead of against you, and find a car that fits, then Project Cars pays you back with a game that has enough options to give you whatever you want out of it, be that tense endurance trials or relaxing supercar drives along the coast. And one day I will play this game in VR, even if we're on Project Cars 46 by the time I get there.